Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, as happy as can be to be back here again. Friday went down to, or from here, it's up to Kentucky, and had a great time there with the folks at St. Pius X Parish, right outside of Cincinnati in Kentucky. And thank you to everybody for that. And thank you to, was it Edgar that covered for me on Friday? Was it Edgar or Thomas? Thomas? Oh, Tom, well, thank you to Thomas, the TikTok engine, for covering. We got a great program for you. Dr. Andrew Willard Jones will be here second hour. We're going to talk about his new book, Church Against the State. There's a lot of foment in the Catholic world about how are we supposed to deal with modern liberal democracies, modern capitalistic states, all of this. These elements have come more and more to the fore in recent years. And Dr. Andrew Willard Jones has magnificent things to say in the book Church Against the State. So hang on for the second hour. First hour, our good friend, Dr. Stacy Trasancos, scientist and theologian and philosopher. We'll ask her about that, is here. She blogs over at Substack. God and Elements is the name of her blog. She's, of course, the author of Particles of Faith and Behold It Is I, the book on Eucharistic miracles and other things, and a PhD chemist and theologian. And we're always glad to have her here to talk about faith and science, and that's what we're going to do today. But she has a new book that I would just like to ask her about to start. Dr. Stacy Trasancos, thanks for being here.
Hello, Cy. It's great to be back.
Should I take off the question mark on philosopher? Have you completed your philosophy studies, or I'm
I've
not taking it off?
completed a master's degree,
Oh,
and
you
I'm
did?
working on a DPhil now at the St. Patrick Pontifical University in Ireland. So I'm working on another doctorate.
No, master's degree, that makes you a philosopher. You either,
In a way.
if you give up everything, just go live on the street asking people what is the meaning of life, or you get a master's degree, you're a philosopher.
Right.
888-318-7884 is the number if you've got questions about faith and science. If you're a person that maybe you've got questions from the point of view of not having faith, and you'd like to know about how we think about faith and science, or anybody else, anybody can call 888-318-7884. So the new book is called IVF is Not the Way, The False Promise of Artificial Procreation. Tell me about that, Stacy.
Well, it's a book I started writing just at the end of December, so it was a very fast write. And it's in response to President Trump's executive order for a 90-day policy review of in vitro fertilization as a way to solve the low birth rate crisis in the United States. And so the book is based on the teaching of the apostles, the way of life and the way of death, and makes the argument, the full ground-up argument from God exists and how we know God exists and how God revealed truths to us, including our human dignity and our intellect and will and our practice of virtue, all the way up to the rights of children, how they have children, all children have a right to be born, to be conceived of love between a mother and a father. And so it goes through the whole IVF argument, and then also gets into what we do about all the embryonic children who are in storage tanks right now.
But people love babies and they want babies. So what do you say to them?
Yeah, that's a natural and good desire, but it's a classic case of the ends don't justify the means. And the church has always, even since the 1800s, I was surprised to learn the consideration went that far back. Even since the 1800s, when there were no extra embryos in freezers, there was just the consideration of artificial insemination. The church has always said, you cannot break that marital bond, that unitive and procreative aspect of the conjugal act. It is so precious and so sacred, and that is the only way to bring a human person into existence in cooperation with God's will. And you can't break that unitive and procreative bonds. And that's a really hard argument to make in our society, who already doesn't understand what a human person is, nor what marriage really is, the way that Catholic teaching does. And so to say that it breaks the natural unity of the human person and the natural unity of the marriage bond will sound like theological gibberish. And so it's really a time for Catholics to get their heads around what this argument is and the deep ontological meaning of this argument, because it's a really good time for evangelization.
Yeah.
As we start talking about this.
Of ourselves as much as anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. Her newest book is IVF is Not the Way, The False Promise of Artificial Procreation. Who's publishing it?
Sophia Institute Press.
Sophia Institute Press. They do beautiful books. Check it out there and get it, because we need to prepare ourselves for this conversation. I sometimes think as Catholics, we don't think enough. We don't give enough thought to what will make us popular. We're always like, in these moral arguments, we don't take the popular side every time. I mean, sometimes we do. We're against exploitation of workers. Well, that's generally popular. But don't you think we'd be more popular if we did not fight against IVF?
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe, because a lot of people want to think that it's okay. But as always, why do we do apologetics? Why do we defend the truth? It's because that is the only true way to happiness. Pursuing the good in our life. And you've got to understand what that means to be able to pursue it. And one thing that became clear to me in writing this book, which ought to be a popular concept, is that the more I practiced the church's teachings, I'm a convert, the more I understood the blessings I would receive for practicing the hardest teachings, like for that obedience, that docility blessed me in my own life. I started understanding the meaning of my marriage. It made my marriage stronger. I started understanding what it means to be a mother, and it made me a better mother. And it helped me to fix all kinds of relationships with people that I had broken before I converted. So there's, the hardest teachings have the greatest blessings, and that ought to be a popular concept.
Again, the number is 888-318-7884. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. And if you've got questions about faith and science, we'd love it if you'd call and talk about IVF. We're always willing to talk about IVF. And the new book is IVF is Not the Way from Sophia Institute Press. But you can call with any question that you've got on the relationship between faith and science. And you're especially welcome if you come come from the point of view that faith is incompatible with science. Dr. Stacy would be happy to talk with you about that. 888-318-7884. So many people make the argument against IVF solely or predominantly, and in some cases solely, on the idea that it involves the destruction of embryonic human beings. But you didn't start there. You started with the right of the child to be conceived in love.
Yeah, I started with God exists.
Okay.
And I make the reader in the book wait. I mean, of course, you can look at the table of contents, but I don't get to the embryos and freezers part until the end of the book. The bulk of the book lays out a 10-step logical syllogistic argument in true Carlo Broussard style of how we get from God exists to IVF is wrong. And, you can't just say God exists, therefore IVF is wrong. You can't just make that jump. But stepping through it logically, and I love logic for that reason, if each step can be shown to be true, then the person following the steps is compelled to accept the final conclusion. And so it also lays out the different steps for people to have arguments with. And the reason I laid it out in the book then is so people can understand the argument and the different parts of the argument and how they all fit together. Because usually when you're in a conversation, you have to be nimble and agile. You have to be able to enter the conversation at whatever point in the argument the other person is. And so it's helpful to understand where you are in the argument between God exists and IVF is wrong, and understand how to address the person in front of you, whether you're talking about children being gifts or the unity of marriage being sacred, whatever it is, it helps to know where you are.
IVF is Not the Way, the new book from Dr. Stacy Trasancos, and I hope you'll get it. But if you want to talk about faith and science, where they meet, where they don't meet, maybe, in your opinion, 888-318-7884. Before we go to a break, Stacy, I would like to ask you this. What is the church's teaching on the child conceived by IVF?
All children are precious. I make the comparison like if It's the conception that is problematic. It's not the child at all. We wouldn't tell a single mother who, or, a teen mother who had a child out of wedlock that the way she conceived the child makes the child less worthy. Not at all. All children are brought into existence by God. God immediately gives the human soul to the body, and God immediately creates and holds us in existence. So whether it happens, the fertilization happens in a petri dish or the conception happens in the womb like it's supposed to, the child itself is still a creature of God and loved by God, and the same in dignity as all the rest of us.
I'll tell you what, we've got 2 lines open, so you can still get in if you'd like to talk with Dr. Stacy Trasancos about faith and science. 888-318-7884.
Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
For years and years, I listened to Rush Limbaugh, and I was a devoted fan. I loved him. When he died, I didn't care for the characters that replaced him. So I went spinning the dial and discovered you. I knew nothing about you. I have become a devoted listener to your programs. Your efforts are inspiring, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate it.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest, which is always fun. And I would take up the whole hour talking with Stacy. She's always fascinating and helpful and interesting. But there's lots of folks on the line, so we're going to get to the calls there. Just one line open now if you want to talk about faith and science, 888-318-7884. I'll just tell you this, Stacy, before I go to the caller. On Saturday morning, I was speaking at St. Pius X Parish in Edgewood, Kentucky. And after the talk, this mother and father came up to me and they said, "We have a son who is a scientist, and is there any book out there we could just give him about?" And I was so happy to say, "Yeah, Particles of Faith." And they were like,
"Thank you."
They were amazed at how quickly they were hardly finished with their question before I was able to recommend the book. But
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the book for him, because you love science and you love the faith, and it comes through. All right, let's go to Stephen. I'm going to say Maine. I'm going to say that Luca meant Maine by that, watching on YouTube. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm glad that Stacy's on. I was calling for her.
Yep, go ahead.
When I found out she was on.
Great. We're
a science-related question. Stacy, do you support the theory of evolution as proposed by Charles Darwin as the truth?
Okay. That is a question that has to be answered with the definition of the theory of evolution. So I do support Darwin's theory understood as it was understood by Darwin in his day. I also understand that we've learned more about genetics in that time with what DNA is and how genetics are transferred from parents to offspring, and how genes change in populations over time. I support, inconsistent with what the church says we're allowed to support, I support that there can be genetic variation and gene populations can change in a population over time, and therefore traits can evolve, even to the point of new species arising. I don't support what some call now Darwinism, which is if it equals materialism. The philosophical idea of Darwinism, that everything that we are as humans is due to evolution of the body. We can't support that as Catholics because, as we know from divine revelation and the tradition of the church, the human person is body and rational soul, and the rational soul is immaterial, and immaterial things don't evolve. So evolution is just a part of the story of how living things evolve, and it's also an incomplete part of the story. There's still a lot that we don't understand about how an offspring born to parents is like those parents, like the same species, but also a unique individual, and how environmental pressures affect how different genes evolve and how different genes are even expressed during the lifetime of an organism. Does that answer your question?
Well, almost. My background is in botany and agronomy, but in any event, you say you don't like Darwinism.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, we can't. Darwinism, as I defined it, is untenable for us as Catholics. But the evolutionary theory that started with Darwin is a valid scientific theory. And even some would say a fact, that in the fact that we can see gene frequencies change in populations over time. So I hope I clarified that. There's a lot of different ways people define evolution.
You do sound a bit unsatisfied, Steve. If you want to have a follow-up, you're welcome to ask a follow-up question.
No, I've got it. And I appreciate the time.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Steve. Thanks very much. We'll go down to Georgia from Maine down the, is that the 95? I think the 95 runs down there. Stan in Georgia, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy Trasancos.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Very well. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Trasanko. Your book, Particles of Faith, I've sent that to my favorite daughter, my only daughter, and she's a scientist.
Careful.
She used to go to Eucharistic adoration and in college and stuff, and now she's kind of one of those nuns who has kind of fallen away from the faith.
Oh,
and,
that kind of nun.
I sent her your book. I sent it to. I recommended it to several science people I know. I'd like to ask you two things. If you could talk about, it's not really a question, if you could just talk about 2 points of your life. One, about your conversion, that moment you mentioned in Particles of Faith when you're watching flowers grow, and you thought about photosynthesis, and how that kind of spurred your conversion, if I'm not mistaken. And the second thing is regarding the last caller. If you can look up a guy named David Gelernter, Gelerntner, He's a scientist, a writer on Judaism, and he really talks a lot about how Darwinism was kind of, he talks about the errors of Darwinism. So anyway, that's just an aside there. The other thing is about how do you counsel Catholic couples who have tried everything, and they've run against roadblocks in, I may have missed something of what you said already, but forgive me as I'm being redundant, have run against roadblocks in the adoption process, and they're just kind of, almost desperate, to
have children. So how do you counsel them, Dr. Stacy?
Yeah. Okay. Where do you want me to start? So I'll go backwards on that one, and I'll try to keep it short because there's other callers on here. The whole IVF question and infertility, it's always going to be a difficult one because couples who desperately want a baby, like they need oxygen, is a totally understandable thing, and it's very heartbreaking to hear that IVF is not a illicit procedure by the teaching of the church, which is conforming to God's will. And so it is like I've learned about so many things as I've gotten older, and I think a lot of people living a life of faith learns. you just can't control a lot of things in your life. There are a lot of things we have to come to accept that aren't as we would like them to be, even with children, even with raising children when you have them. There's a lot of things that don't go the way you want them to go. And life becomes this constant conversation with God about how do I conform my will to your will? And IVF is very clearly, it's good to understand the reasons why, rejected by the church as not the way of loving our neighbor and loving God. It's not the way to happiness, and understanding that as part of it. But then that is also a very bitter gift to accept. But if you are truly infertile and cannot have children, like everything else in life, some of the hardest things, it's still a gift. And we're still called to ask God, how do we serve our fellow human beings then, if not by parenthood? And so that's not the answer a lot of couples want. And that's the reason I wrote the book, because you can't just throw that answer out. God said you can't. So there has to be some compassion there and some understanding. And for me, as a convert, learning about why the church says what it says, learning the reasons, helped me a whole lot in conforming my will, because then I was like, okay, I understand why now. It made it easier. Going back from that, I already got into then some of my own work in science. When I was becoming Catholic and I saw that word gift in the catechism, I had never thought of children as gifts. And I already had two at that point, two children. I thought of them as highly complex composite systems of atoms and compounds and molecules. And I didn't think of the human person the way the church does. I had never heard about a rational soul before. But once I understood that children are gifts, that so profoundly changed my life that I left the career at DuPont that I had worked my whole life to achieve, going through graduate school and getting a PhD and everything. It was a very easy decision at that point that I wanted to pursue that call to motherhood. And so I did have I have 7 children now, and I'm very blessed with them. But I'll be very quick to also tell you, there are a lot of bitter gifts that come with raising children and loving them and seeing them become adults. There's a lot of things there. So as we get older, my husband lost his parents last year. Your life does become this constant conversation with God about how to conform your life to God. I love science now more than ever. Cy can tell you that. I love atoms. And I love understanding science as the study of God's handiwork. And so I teach now college students to pass that message on. I hope I wrapped it all up.
Did that help you, Stan?
Yes. Can I ask one more question about science is a study? Science is a study of the handiwork of God. Is that your quote?
Yeah.
Is that ever her quote? I've heard her say it like a billion times.
I know. I've quoted so many times.
If somebody said it before me, I don't know who it was. I thought of it after my son prayed. He was 4 years old, and he said, "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy atoms," which we were about to receive before a meal. And it made me think that that is how we look at science. We say, thank you, God, for everything in the universe. And then science is studying what God created. That line I've seen it affect a lot of students and how they think about science.
Stan, thank you. Thank you very much. Just think of Stacy as a mother. This is her children. These thy atoms we are about to receive. That is so consistent with Stacy's view. She loves atoms so much, she's made out of them. All right, let's go to Omaha, Nebraska. Tom in Omaha, Nebraska. Thank you for calling, Tom. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy Trasancos, scientist and theologian.
First, thanks for taking my call. And second, you're a wonderful person doing God's will.
Thank you.
Now,
Stacy. Oh, sorry, my bad.
Well, both of you.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
Okay.
Cy is a wonderful person.
Here's my question. Do you think that the fact that so many Catholics accept artificial birth control and in vitro fertilization and who knows what else has anything to do with the fact that sin and hell and other things are rarely talked about in the church and on the pulpit or anything else? What do you think about that?
That's a hard one for me to answer, because talking about sin and hell is absolutely something we have to do. But having worked with a lot of young adults, teenagers, and college students, you got to address that topic very carefully, because it's like with IVF. You don't want people to walk away going, well, God said IVF is wrong, therefore it's wrong. I don't believe in God, therefore who cares? I'll do what I want. You don't want people to do that. And if you talk about hell and it sounds too much like, you're going to burn in hell if you don't do the right thing, people will listen to you to a certain point when they hear something like that, and they'll hang on it and seize on it. And I call it a derailer, and then they won't hear anything else you say. But yes, I would hope that our dear priest, who we all look to for guidance in the spiritual life, would carefully explain those things more to us. I have seen groups of teenagers. We do a pro-life camp in the summer. We've had priests come in and deal with the hard topics like that with them, and it's life-changing because there's something special about them all being together and hearing the hard messages together that really bonds them and makes them open to the truth.
Tom, thanks. You can hear the music. We got to take a quick break. One line open right now, but lots of calls to come for Dr. Stacy Trasancos, scientist and theologian. Her new book is called IVF is Not the Way, the False Promise of Artificial Procreation. Back with more right after this.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest, and we're talking about faith and science. If you have a question about faith and science, you want to have a conversation, or maybe you've got some thoughts you'd like to test with Dr. Stacy Trasancos, you're welcome. 888-318-7884. Jean-Pierre is in Texas listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Jean-Pierre, welcome. Go ahead with your question.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Stacy, for that book. So which one is the way for going and trying to investigate the causes of infertility or trying to get help in infertility in a Catholic way?
Yes, there's several different names for it, but I would recommend looking up online fertility care, all one word, and the Creighton method. Those are different forms of, they're different ways of expressing natural family planning. And what that is, and what I love about it as a woman and a mother of 5 daughters, it is a holistic way of looking at the woman's body. I have friends who are fertility care practitioners who work with couples who are infertile. And it does what the church says. Fertility care that assists reproduction is fine. It's just that you can't replace the conjugal act. So you can assist, but you can't replace. You can't fertilize an egg in a lab. That's not true conception. And what fertility care does, though, or the Creighton method or natural family planning, if a doctor is using that, it looks at what's going on in the woman's body. So a woman's body, in case you haven't heard, has a lot of hormones. And there are cycles of those hormones that go in and out throughout the month. And there are ways to know what part of the cycle you're in. And there are certain days of the month when you're fertile. And if you follow your cycle every day, so you gather data from your own body every day by looking at fluids, and you can start to chart and start to figure out when your body is ovulating. I have heard of several cases where gynecologists told the woman she was infertile, and the woman went to a fertility care specialist and started charting her cycles over a couple of months. And it turned out the woman wasn't infertile at all. Her cycle wasn't a 28-day cycle. It was a few days shorter consistently. And so it wasn't that she was infertile. It's just that she didn't understand which days of the month she was fertile on. And one friend of mine in particular had that happen. She was pregnant a month later. So the approach to a woman's health that says, get to know the woman's body, study the woman's body, let the woman's body tell you what's going on, is a much better way. There are cases where by doing fertility care, you can diagnose, you can get data that helps diagnose whether the woman has cyst, whether she has something else going on that can be treated that might open up fertility. And you can also tell if there is true infertility, because there are things to look for in the body. I hope our country goes that way, because it is the anti-big pharma way. It's the way that says natural health care. Let's study the woman's body and get to understand it. So that is the alternative, and it is a very good method. It's not perfect, but I would much rather go that way instead of pills. Okay,
Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to be a fertility care practitioner, and that's what I ask. Sorry.
Thank you.
But
you could have said all that.
and the reason I brought it up is I'm an engineer, and I became a practitioner because my wife and I were suffering of infertility, and we discovered naprotechnology and all that. And I'm sorry if I ask, but sometimes it's one of the best kept secrets of our faith, our Catholic faith, and it is good to broadcast it. And you're right, especially nowadays with the Orange Man trying to, that means Trump, trying to bring this IVF, which I hope and pray that someone in the Catholic environment that he's in, that he will hear about naprotechnology and the Creighton model system. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Jean-Pierre, thank you very, very much.
Yeah. I hope somebody sends him my book.
Oh, yes, I'm sure that people will. And so just to be clear, what Jean-Pierre is referencing, you know more about than I do, Stacy. So there's a 90-day kind of review of IVF policy in the U.S. Is that what we're in now? So your book, in a certain way, is meant to get in that conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all should. All Catholics should get in that conversation.
Yes.
Are there other ways to get involved, or is it just a government review?
It's a government policy review, but the whole nation's talking about it now. That's why people are so interested. And so the fact that people have questions about IVF, like Catholics are saying, wait, I don't really understand the argument here. It's a good time to talk, because it's also a good time to talk about why the human person is body and rational soul, why marriage is the unity of a man and woman, why children have a right to be conceived in love between a mother and father. It's a good time to talk about the stability of marriage, the health of individuals. It brings all kinds of questions. And I really do think after this 90-day policy review, there's still going to be another series of months that come where things are being decided. So it's time to bring it, Catholics. Bring it.
All right, Jean-Pierre, thank you very much for the call. Let's go to Dan in Humboldt, Texas, also listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Dan, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Stacy.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cy Kellett and Dr. Stacy.
I got promoted.
That's an honorary degree, Cy.
Thank you. From Humboldt University.
You guys do a phenomenal job.
Well, thank you.
You
Thank
do a
you.
phenomenal job, so I couldn't resist saying you qualify.
Thank you, Dan.
Amen.
I have a very quick question, and I don't have to stay on the line for it because I don't have a follow-up, and I know you've got a lot of calls in waiting. So my question is quite simply back to evolution for just a minute. One of the key principles of evolutionary theory is survival of the fittest. However, I find that part of the evolutionary theory to be diametrically opposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ, who preaches over and over again about taking care of the poor, the suffering, the weak, the downtrodden, even to the point where suffering has value, exceedingly valuable. That seems to me to run absolutely contrary to survival of the fittest. So I'm wondering if you've thought about that, Dr. Stacy, and how you reconcile those two things that, at least on the surface, look diametrically opposed to each other.
Thank you, Dan.
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm going to give an answer. Hopefully it's concise. It's the difference between us and animals. So my dog is a 13-year-old German Shepherd. I love her to death. She's at the end of her life, and she's very loyal to me. But if I left my sandwich on the table, she would eat it. Like she would not be able to practice any kind of virtue whatsoever. She just does what she's made to do. She's not a rational creature. She's pretty intelligent. But the survival of the fittest was in reference to the individuals in a population that can get their genes into the next generation. They can reproduce more. So you have to live long enough to reproduce. You have to be healthy to reproduce. And we're talking about IVF and all of that. They have to be able to get, and when you do reproduce, then your offspring has your genes, and if whatever genes, the thinking is whatever genes allowed you to live long enough and thrive and survive as the fittest allows you to get your genes into the next generation. So what it's talking about in a scientific level is just the individuals who are able to survive and reproduce have their genes propagated through the generations for evolution, and the ones who can't survive don't. But it doesn't mean on a human level at all. Like, it would be a false extrapolation of that idea to say that that might makes right, that human. That's why we're talking about IVF. That's why we talk about abortion. We have to treat those little bitty embryos and little bitty unborn babies with all the dignity due any other person. We are not animals. And even if there was a survival of the fittest that could be possible with humans, it's wrong for the reasons that you said. We are called to take care of the poor and love the weakest among us. So survival of the fittest doesn't really mean that, and that would be horrible if it did. And some people have thought it did, and they were wrong. It just meant survival of able to reproduce.
Dan said he would listen off the air, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
For the call and question. Before I take another break, I can get another caller in here. Theodore is in France. It says listening on Catholic 540, which I thought was in South Carolina. But are you in France, Theodore?
Yes, I am.
Oh, well, welcome.
Hi, Theodore.
But you listen on a South Carolina radio station?
Correct, internet. Yes.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool. Very good.
It's late at night here, but I love the show.
It is.
So I'm packing my bag, and so that's what I do in the meantime. Yes.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Wonderful. So thank you again for having me. This is great to be on the show. I've been listening to your show and others wonderful shows for the past, I would say, 7 years now. It's really wonderful to be part of such a great community. And I would say from a faithful chemist to another faithful chemist. My question is the following. It's about the economy of atoms on Earth. The question of Jesus being a human being, or having been a human being walking on Earth, has consumed matter. Water, he has drank water, he has breathed the air. That's been consumed and rejected through the biochemical events that we all know about. The question is, what happens to humanity if humanity ingests these atoms that Jesus has used and rejected? Does it make us second-class relics, or what's the significance of that recycling of atoms?
Oh, you are speaking my language. I always wonder during Mass if the priest really got every last atom of the body off of the, like, did you get it all? So, yeah, I get what you're saying. And that is a very, very interesting question. I mean, we know from Aristotelian natural philosophy that St. Thomas Aquinas also used to explain the doctrines of the faith, that the matter has to be disposed to the form. And so whatever matter formed Christ's body is still there, because you're right, atoms, little known thing, but the atoms that do the chemical reactions, not every one on the periodic table does, but the elements that participate in chemical reactions are very stable. They it's very possible that a carbon atom that made up Christ's body is in one of our bodies. It's very possible that oxygen that Christ breathed is still bumbling around in the atmosphere and somebody else is breathing it. It's possible that a raindrop that hit Christ's body has also, we've consumed it. And so I don't know the answer to your question, because I don't think anybody's ever thought about it before. It would seem that you're right in a sense, but I haven't thought about it enough to say absolutely right. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's ever studied where all the atoms go after a human body dies. Like, where do they disperse in the world? And we would kind of need to know that to get some understanding about just how far, anything that touched. So Christ's body was resurrected and assumed, but like you're saying, the things he ate and touched in his lifetime could be touching us.
That's such a weird question, because we know Christ is supernaturally diffused in the world through the church and her sacraments, but there's also the natural diffusion of Christ in the world. And what are the implications of that? I've never thought of it myself.
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify one thing you said, Stacy. You said an atom that was in his body could be in our bodies, and somebody's going to go, but his body rose from the dead.
Yeah.
But,
I realize that. Yeah.
But many atoms pass through our bodies in the course of our lifetime. So I just want to clarify that. That's true. There's billions of atoms that pass through Christ's body that are here on this earth with us.
Like if he cut his fingernails.
Yeah. I hope he did. Theodore, does that get to what you wanted to get to?
Yes, it's the beginning of an answer, I would say. This is something I have to think much deeper, much more.
Yeah. Well, don't ask like the only one, Theodore. You're not the only one that thinks about it. Every time it rains, I'm like, I wonder if those raindrops.
Right.
Oh yeah, I bet I'm sure there are saints who meditated on that as well as you weirdo scientists. But thank you to both of you. You said you're a chemist, just like Stacy?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the call. We got to take a break. Sorry about that, but we got to take a break. Right back with more Dr. Stacy Trasancos on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
EWTN offers the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass live every morning at 8 Eastern and provides you with daily readings to follow along and enrich your experience. To be sure you don't miss out on the daily Mass or to get access to previous recordings, we can send a link to your email inbox every day. It's easy. Visit EWTN.com and click subscribe. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Dr. Stacy Trasancos, PhD in chemistry, also a theologian, and then now working on her doctorate in philosophy. Soon she will have it all figured out. I don't know how soon that will be. Yeah, are you trying? Are you doing a unified theory?
The search for truth.
Right. And I do think that in the end, though, you will not figure it all out. You're going to need it explained to you.
I know.
But you know what? I believe it will be explained to you.
Yes.
Or shared with you. That might be a better way to say it. 888-318-7884. The whole country here is having a conversation about IVF, or at least we should be, given the political winds that are blowing and the president's 90-day review of IVF policy. If you'd like to get the book, IVF is Not the Way. It's the new book by Dr. Stacy Trasancos. The subtitle is The False Promises of Artificial Procreation, and it's available from Sophia Institute Press. We are just talking faith and science, and you can call if you've got a faith and science question. Let's go to this. I've never got a family call before. Is this the Marvel family?
Hi, yes.
Oh, the whole family's on the line? All right.
We're huge fans, and we usually listen together, so we thought we'd call in together.
Oh, that is very, very nice. All right. Are you going to ask the question in harmony, like 4-part harmony, or what are you going to do?
No, actually, I have one of Dr. Trasancos' former students here, so I think I'm going to let her ask the question.
Oh,
okay, I'm going to ask it.
How did she turn out? Is she good? Like,
she's great. It was a great opportunity for her. But our question actually is not related to that directly. It's related to something that's being debated a lot at our church, which is organ donation. And I did read on Catholic.com that St. John Paul the Great said that organ donation, I believe, is a good thing. But there are a lot of concerns now about brain death and perhaps unintentionally encouraging euthanasia for organ donation. So I'm just wondering, like, how can we be confident when making that decision for our loved ones or opting to be organ donors on our driver's licenses?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good question. Yeah, you've done entire shows on this, haven't you, Cy?
I think we have done entire shows, but it has also come up as a question quite often.
Quite often.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one to say. So, because there's a lot of things called honor walks. And if you look on social media at all, you'll see a lot of honor walks where people are talked into rolling their loved ones down the hospital aisle from the ICU room to the organ harvesting surgery room with all the cords and tubes and everything still on that person who's technically still alive but imminently going to be dead. And they do an honor walk because that person is going to have the organs harvested, honestly, while the person's still alive. And it's horrifying. And brain death has been very suspect. You know, some people will say brain death, that absolutely happens. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to say one way or the other. But brain death has become so ambiguous that people are concerned that brain death will be declared when it's not. There are stories of people who have heard themselves be called, Zach Dunlap, I think is the one I'm thinking of. It's just one guy, but heard himself being declared brain death, and he couldn't move, but he wasn't dead. And he wiggled his toe, and his cousin saw it, and then he woke up and said, "I'm glad y'all didn't take my organs." So it's a big conversation, and how can you be absolutely sure if it's your own loved one? So this is where prudential judgment and discernment and working with a doctor you trust comes into play. So death is defined in different ways by the irreversible cessation of the heart or the brain activity. But philosophically, it's the disintegration of the whole, and theologically, it's when the soul leaves the body. Those philosophical and theological ways you can't measure. And so what the church says, you can only harvest organs if you're certain death has occurred. So you got to be talking with a doctor you trust who can tell you with certainty when death occurs. And if there is consent of the individual, or if it was all worked out with the family or something before, organ donation is morally licit under those circumstances. It's even, a true giving of oneself. But when it comes to, we've talked about this in our own family, we want to make sure the doctor understands if anybody's going to donate anything after death, we need a moral certainty that that person is in fact dead, not about to die. So the reason they put pressure on you to have the honor walks is because fresh organs are more transplantable. If they can get an organ that's still in a body where the heart's pumping blood throughout the body, then that organ will more likely survive being transplanted into another person. So that's why they call them honor walks, because you're giving life to the next several people who will get your organs. But the church says that's not okay. You cannot kill a person and use them for their organs. And there have been lawsuits where parents wanted a child's organs to be donated, and the medical staff waited too long for death to actually occur, that the organs were no longer usable, and they tried to sue the doctor for not getting the girl's organs. So it's like IVF. It forces us all to really think about what is the purpose of our life. The purpose of our life is not to be organ donors. The purpose of our life is to conform our will to God's and to evangelize and get as many people, including ourselves, to heaven as possible during this life. So if you're not able to donate organs, that's not what your life was for anyway.
Marvel family, thank you very much. I'm going to keep moving because I realize we're near the end and we've only got Stacy for a few more minutes. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Marvel.
Linda in St. Louis, Missouri, listening on 1460 AM. Linda, if you could be quick with your call, you'd help us out.
I just had two quick questions. Stacy, when you talked about the dignity of the child referring to the mother's method of conception, I was wondering why you didn't mention the father, because there is a father. It reminded me of the parable of the adulterous woman who was stoned and the man was not mentioned. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I was wondering why you used the term single mother, because a single mother could be a mother who is widowed or divorced who had her children during her marriage.
No, those are good corrections. I'm talking fast because we have just a little bit of time, but in the book, I do deal with all of those things. The fathers absolutely are not left out. I, as a woman who loves her husband very much and knows I couldn't be raising children without him, no, don't leave the father out. You're absolutely right. I agree with both things you said, and I'm sorry that I was speaking fast and didn't capture what you just said, and I'm glad that you did.
Oh, thank you.
All right. I'm going to thank you very much for being quick for us, Linda. I appreciate that.
That was a good point.
I'm going to go see if I can get as many on as I can. Mike is in Illinois. Mike, could you be quick with your question?
Yes. I want to thank you for your program. And my question has to do with how we perceive God. All living things supposedly have souls, like immortal ones for humans and non-mortal ones for like plants and animals. And so I was wondering how we really understand the perception of God from how things point to God.
Well, that's a good question. We talk about traces and image and likeness of God, traces of the Trinity in creation, how all creation is made in the image of God. And how the human person is made in the image and likeness of God. All of that ties into what you're saying about how we see things in nature. And I'm not talking about like proteins being in the shape of a cross or anything like that. I'm talking about the relationship that we see in nature. Everything is really interconnected. That when you look at the stars, that's where the elements are made for you. St. Thomas Aquinas was very clear that God made the elements, God made the atoms for the sake of the human person. The body is for the sake of the soul, and all the elements in the whole universe were created for the sake of our human bodies. So it's all directed toward an end, and that's us being reunited with God. And everything that God made, the creature is an expression of the Creator. And so everything that God made has some expression of God. And again, it's not in shape of crosses and things like that or flashes of light, but it's more in the relationship. Even in your own body's homeostasis, if you get a little bit sick, your whole body is off kilter. If you don't get enough sleep, your whole body is off kilter. All of the planet as we know it, and we don't know much about out in the rest of the universe, but the planet as we know it is a very delicate balance. And so everything else is interconnected to every other thing in some way. There's amazing relationship, even in the way two hydrogens and one oxygen make the water molecule. So that's part of what I tell my students, that science is the study of God's handiwork. When you study the relationships in science and the precision and mathematics in science, you're getting a glimpse into the mind of God.
And I am going to leave it there, Mike, because that brings us to the end of our hour with Dr. Stacy Trasancos. And I want to recommend to folks that they check out her new book, IVF is Not the Way, The False Promises of Artificial Procreation. You might remember we had Father Tad Paholchik on the other day, and I think all of this is contributing to this national kind of reconsideration we have of IVF and IVF policy, and many good things can come from this if we will not neglect our duty to be participants in these conversations and sharing the truth as it's been shared with us. We got to go out and share it. Check out Dr. Stacy Trasancos' musings on God and elements over at Substack. Dr. Trasancos, thank you. It's always a great pleasure.
Thank you, Cy.
Science is the study of the handiwork of God. I have literally heard her say it 1 billion times. A billion. All right, right back with Dr. Andrew Willard Jones on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And as promised, Dr. Andrew Willard Jones, our guest this hour, a brand new book called The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty. And, we don't, we try very hard not to talk about politics. We don't do economics on this show. We talk about the faith and we try to share the faith. And so let's break all those rules this hour. Let's talk about politics and economics and all of that stuff. Dr. Andrew Willard Jones is professor of history and political theory at the College of St. Joseph the Worker in Steubenville, Ohio. Doctor, first of all, welcome, thank you, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you here with us. I have to say, I've been enjoying reading the book, but also I have your way of understanding some ideas that I thought I was familiar with was challenging to me, and the idea of subsidiarity in particular. In some cases, I felt it was quite exhilarating what you were describing when you talked about subsidiarity. And so maybe you could start there with us. I mean, you put it right in the subhead of the book on subsidiarity and sovereignty. So what is subsidiarity?
Yeah, great. Well, the easiest way to describe it might be the way that it most typically is, which is actually kind of inadequate, but it's an okay place to begin.
Okay.
Right? So typically, people will define subsidiarity as the principle, a sort of governing principle, that problems should be solved at the smallest level possible, so that interventions from above shouldn't occur unless the smaller levels of social order are somehow failing or incapable. All right, and that's an okay way of describing it, but it's negative, right? And a better way is a positive description of it, which is something like there are true human goods that are realizable or that are capable of being had, capable of being enjoyed, only at different levels of social order. So think the family, the community, the parish level, the town level, the whatever the level of a state, higher than that. That there's different levels of social order, and that there are goods, real human goods that contribute to human flourishing, that are constituted and enjoyed at those levels. And therefore, any sort of disruption of the smaller levels, which have less power than those which are bigger and have more power, is an injustice against them.
Yeah.
But even beyond that the higher levels of order are their function, or the reason they exist, is to enrich the lower levels of order, to elevate the lower levels of order into a greater share of human flourishing, or a greater participation in the good as a whole.
Yeah, I have to, now I may not use the example as, I won't use it as well as you use it in the book. So if correcting me as part of your answer, that's perfectly fine. But an image that I found just so beautiful in this book is the image of the family welcoming a baby, and what you were able to do is show that the family welcoming the baby is not just a matter of the family giving the baby all the things it needs to welcome the child. It's also a matter of the family going out to meet the child, so that the family itself is reconstituted or reinvented by the presence of the baby. And this, to me, is such a beautiful dynamic image of subsidiarity, in that the larger has to go out to meet the smaller. It can't just say, I'm the context in which you exist. You're not the matter that makes me exist.
That's right. Yeah. So that is, I find often that the family is the place to go because it's an experience that most of us have. Yeah. Right? And so it always, there's some purchase there in our daily life.
Right.
And so that example where if you didn't have a principle of subsidiarity, then maybe you would think something like the baby is born and then the baby is just conformed to the family. So the baby is just integrated into the family, elevated, or just sort of forced to become whatever the family is.
Yeah.
But rather, like you described, it's actually not a process of incorporation, but concorporation, which is just a fancy way of saying that they're growing together. Right, that the family is actually being modified in the direction of the child as the child is modified in the direction of the family. And so what emerges is a new thing that is now a family that intrinsically includes that child. And that is the reason why the family is the child's home, right? Like the family is the place where the child belongs as himself. And it's also the reason why the family then has come to become the place or become an association that requires that child to be itself. So if, for example, if a child is lost, the family is wounded to its core, right? It's not just one of the individuals is gone, but we have 10 others. Do you see what I
Yes, right, right. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Those individuals are now their uniqueness, their personhood, and the cultivation of that personhood. So they're good. Those persons is now what constitutes the common good of the whole. So that same dynamic is applicable at bigger levels of order, larger levels of order, so that the community is like the family is to the child, the community is to the family.
Yeah.
Right. So now the community comes to the family as much as the family goes to the community, and the family is integrated into that larger life, which now has goods that the larger life makes available to the family. Right. But the family doesn't have to give up its identity or its uniqueness or its character in order to do that, because what in a proper, just order, the community becomes the home for the family, just like the way the family becomes the home for the child.
But then there could be communities of communities, like, say, a parish or something. Mm-hmm. And it does seem to me that part of what you're saying in this book, by the way, you should get it, this wonderful new book, The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty, the new book by Andrew Willard Jones. It does seem to me that part of what you're saying is that we have suffered a loss of like this image that you have rooted in the family and in this going out to meet each other. It seems like there's something about the whatever period we're in now, and you fuss a little bit over what we should call this period, but whatever it's called, whatever this is, this thing we're living in, it's much more individualized, separated, and it doesn't have all those rich layers that the good, healthy society would have.
Yeah, that's right. So, and this is a problem that has been recognized since the beginning of Western political thought. So Aristotle, really? Plato know that the centralization of power. So if you're going to amass power into one big homogeneous centralized thing, if that's what you want, then a prerequisite is reducing the significance of all the intermediary levels of order. So what you want is a sea, in the ideal, if you're a tyrant, is what you want is a sea of individuals who have virtually as little association with each other as possible. And then you can, and because that then renders them available for their lives to be completely structured and ordered by the big centralized thing. Right. So the centralization of power always involves both the rejection of any universal power, so anything bigger than the state or whatever it is that is trying to centralize power, like the church or something like that, and the rejection of the legitimacy of any power within smaller structures of order, and the attempt to eliminate that. So we see this you can see this very clearly with a sort of war against the church, or war against family structures is one of the most obvious ones for us. But one of the reasons why it's the most obvious for us is because our society has already eliminated any thick communities. The family's like the last holdout, which is the reason why we see it under attack, right? But earlier in the modern period, the smaller communities, the village communities, the guilds, the clans, these were under attack, and they got liquidated as the states are built, and now the family is the last holdout, and maybe quite possibly the what am I trying to say? The institution. The social institution that has the most resistance built into it, and so the hardest one to beat.
Yeah,
it might just outlast the state.
But the last one standing so far is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
It's obvious when you write that you delight in thinking about these things. There's obvious joy in the way that you write about them. And that's something I really appreciated in this book, The Church Against the State. I have to take a break, but before I take the break, and I'll give out the number again, if you'd like to talk with Dr. Andrew Willard Jones about the Church Against the State on subsidiarity and sovereignty, the number is 888-318-7884. If I asked you this question in class, I'm sitting in your class and I asked you this question, I'm wondering how you would answer it. Is the problem of government or of governance in general primarily a problem of organization or of formation? Do we need better organizations? Do we need to organize ourselves better, or do we need to be better formed as a people? Which thing matters more?
Well, that's such an interesting question. That goes to the very heart of political theory. Okay, so let me try to answer it by saying both. Yes.
Okay.
So here's what. Let me try. So one of the key insights of Western thought, social thought, is that the condition of the soul and the structure of the society are bound up together. All right, this goes all the way back to Plato's Republic. That a just society must be made up of just people. All right, so an increasingly unjust society is made up of increasingly unjust people. So. And Plato goes into great detail explaining how this works. So an oligarchic society, which is one of the corrupt societies, is a society that only holds together to the extent that the people have become greedy. All right, and then once their condition of their soul, they're after money, they will now build the structures necessary to maximize their gain. All right, to maximize their ability to gain.
Sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah,
that society.
But there's this feedback loop to it, because once those structures are built, they then discipline and form the society into that virtue, or vice in this case, right? So you have the relationship of the condition of the soul and the structure of society they're not temporally related, like one is prior to the other, or one's first, one's second. It's that they're two aspects of one thing. All right, so a way to think about this might be something like an oligarchy. So if you're trying to amass power and you're building a structure, say, where the structure of society is such that you want people to serve you by paying them money, all right, and you're going to build a structure that's based on that, on payouts. Well, that only creates power for you if the people care about money. Right? So as soon as they don't, it doesn't work anymore.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not that. So if you change the structure, but the people aren't different, well, what's the new structure going to be? I mean, if the new structure is going to have power, if it's going to work, then it has to somehow match up with the condition of soul of the people. Right, and that creates a problem, because, like you're saying, is like, well, if you're going to reform a society, how do you do it? And it's very delicate, and it has to be a sort of dance between conversion of soul and restructuring of law, right? Because the law has an effect on the soul, but it's not the reason the soul is the way it is. Though nevertheless, the discipline of law obviously affects condition of soul, right? And so you have this back and forth. And dance, and that's really the content of what Aristotle or the tradition will refer to as like statesmanship, like the idea that you prudentially have to navigate this, which is not foreign to us, because it's like what a father has to do with his children, right? That you're navigating the difference between discipline and praise, between teaching and laying down the law. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's this dance there.
Well, something in your book made me think to ask that question. I got to take the break, so I'll let you know on the other side what it was in your book that put me in the mind of that question. 888-318-7884 is the number. The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty, the beautiful, important new book by Dr. Andrew Willard Jones. We'll be right back with the author right after this.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Wings is a weekly newsletter that's packed with program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at EWTN. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Dr. Andrew Willard Jones has a new book out called The Church Against the State. And there are many, there are lots of books in this area of conversation that Catholics are having with the world and with each other about government, about which types of government are consistent with the Christian faith. Are there types of government that are maybe not proposed by the Christian faith, but are consistent in such a way that you would even say they would proceed from a Christian populace? Are there or not? And this is a wonderful discussion. I think this is an important book in that discussion because it's not like any of the other books that you're going to read on it. It's really an original work of thinking. And I must say, and this is what I was trying to get at in the beginning, talking about subsidiarity right away, is even in the early chapters of the book, I felt I'm thinking about subsidiarity in ways I have not thought about it before, in ways that are much richer than I had thought about it before. And I think you will find the same thing. So if you've been participating in that conversation, the conversation has probably been going on since the early 2000s, certainly, in the publication of the book, Why Liberalism Failed. This has been, would you agree that was kind of a seminal work that got this conversation?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And
broke it into the mainstream.
And your book is in that conversation.
Yes.
But
yes.
I strongly believe in a new way. This is a very serious contribution to that conversation. Check it out, The Church Against the State, Andrew Willard Jones, the author. But here's why I asked you that question about organization and formation. You said a funny thing near the beginning of the book, that you thought of the book as a defense of America. And you said, why should I be defending America, basically? But
yeah.
It seems to me the American story is we are great because of these structures that we've created, the constitutional order that we've created, the federalism, all of that. But that is completely wrong. That is not why we are great. We are great because of the culture that made those things, and that those things have in many ways done a wonderful job of allowing that culture to flourish. But it's our formation as a culture that made us great. It's not those structures that we invented and we think are the thing that made us great.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can think about that. Americans are funny in that regard, right? Because we're kind of we're not aware of our own virtues in a lot of ways. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or like we think the reason why we think it's because we like hit it on this great constitutional structure or something, and boy, are we lucky. But it's like, no, actually, the reason why that was a form that matched up with who the Americans were was because the Americans it wasn't because Americans were largely self-governing people. So because that's the way we in fact are, which is another way of saying virtuous, right? Because that's the way we in fact are, then we become available for that sort of a constitutional order.
Yes.
Do you see
yes.
what I
do?
That
I do.
It's possible for us. If we're decadent, if we're greedy, if we're self-interested, if we're not self-governing but are grasping after private gain, personal gain as much as we can, personal power, whatever, well then we're not the type that's available for a decentralized order based on some kind of subsidiarity. But then we become a people that not only sort of it's inevitable that we become a sort of centralized sovereign entity, because if everybody's competing for power, somebody's going to win. Right?
Yeah.
so
right.
the force that wins becomes the force that's in power. Everybody else has to either fight it or conform to it. Inevitably, that results in the majority conforming to it, and you get a centralized power with a big homogenous conforming population. And that's sort of the way all tyrannical societies in the history of the world have gone.
Yeah.
Right. So, and what counters that is, like you were saying, is that populations. Let me try to put it this way. It's not merely some sort of moralizing idea about virtue or something. That's true that virtue is essential, but one of the reasons why is because virtuous people are virtuous. The context for virtue is friendships. So virtuous people are formed into virtue in their interactions with other people, right? So like what we were talking about with the family, and those constellations of friendships, those groupings of people that are forming each other into virtue, are strong. Right, because and this is something that Aristotle will say almost in passing. He'll say, the reason why tyrants don't like friendships, the reason why they want to eliminate friendships as much as possible, is because friends won't betray each other. Right, and it's like, but it goes, but it's very simple. But it's even beyond that people who are embedded in homes that involve other people. I don't just mean like the house. I mean the house, the home, the family, the community, the parish, the city, where they are where those groupings are based upon the love and loyalty that constitutes friendships. Those people who live in those worlds occupy worlds where they're not alone, they're not lonely. And that means that they're not scared, or they're way less scared. They're less anxious. Right? They're less fearful. They're less vulnerable. Yeah. And because human beings are social in our very natures, vulnerable, scared, anxious people are desperate. They're desperate for some power that will assuage those disorders. Right? And those become the people who are most susceptible to any sort of mass centralized power. Right? And so for these groupings of friendships, which is where virtue is formed, which is where happiness is had, is also where power is diffused. Like quite literally, those things are powerful things, right? You can only push them so far, right?
Right.
They have
which
the
is
ability.
Is why in Nicaragua they're getting rid of the church. They're trying literally to shove nuns and priests and bishops out of the country or into prison, because the friendship that the church constitutes is powerful, and it has power that the state wants to take away.
That's right. Anywhere where there are real embedded relationships, there are. Think about it. There is in those places basis of order, basis of peace, foundations of social life that is not given to it from above. You see what I mean? It's not that your peace is structured by the police force or by the regulatory apparatus or something. Your peace emerges out of your very relationships. Well, those places then are places where there's social strength that is not dependent upon the larger institution. Well, that's a threat to the larger institution. It's the same reason why the Roman Empire went after the Christians in the early church, because they posed exactly that kind of a problem.
Is that why the book is called The Church Against the State?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So what I'm talking, and that's provocative, I know, and it kind of raises eyebrows with people. But when I'm talking about the state there, I'm not talking about government. I'm not talking about political order. I'm not talking about social structure. I'm talking about the state is a modern phenomenon, right? The state as we think of it is something that is, it's ancient in some regards, and then not medieval, and then it kind of resurfaces in the modern period. But for our purposes, we can talk about it as a modern phenomenon. It's something that emerges in the late medieval and into the early modern period, exactly as the church is as the various kingdoms of Europe try to seek independence from the universal thing, which is the church. All right, so seek a ground for their own power that's not based on them participating in a larger life of the church. So they want to get out from underneath the church, if you want to think of it that way. And then at the same time, they're eliminating diversity within their borders. So it's about eliminating Yeah, so the construction of the modern state has two movements to it. There's the movement of divorce from the universal and homogenization or elimination of diversity internally. And those two movements are what constitute the modern nation state, the modern state.
Yeah, you could see that in Spain very clearly. I mean, if you think of the history of Spain, homogenize the state and then centralize state power.
Right. Yeah, so that's what they want to do. That's the move of the modern period, the movement of the modern period. And so when I'm saying the church against the state, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay, all right, we're going to talk more about it. If you'd like to get in on this conversation, 888-318-7884. It gets better and better the more you talk about it. What a great book, The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty. Andrew Willard Jones is its author, and he is our guest. And this is your chance to talk to him, 888-318-7884.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. There was Plato, there was Aristotle, and now there's Dr. Andrew Willard Jones. How's that? You ever get an introduction like that before?
No.
That's, boy, talk about stopping the heart of a philosopher. The Church Against the State is the new book on subsidiarity and sovereignty. You're welcome to call and get involved in the conversation. You are very welcome here, 888-318-7884. You don't have to agree with anything you've heard. And if you want to take us off on one of the tangents that we've gone on, you want to go back to that, whatever you want to talk about. The Church Against the State is the book. Dr. Andrew Willard Jones is the author, and the number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. So we were talking about why the book is called The Church Against the State. And it's not about the church replacing the state. You do think the state has a role.
Yeah, well, certainly government does. And
government does. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So to the extent that we call that the state, we can do that, although it can be a little bit confusing,
sure.
Right? So I think that the communities in a subsidiarity hierarchy, the communities at every level of scale have an authority that's appropriate to them.
Okay.
Right.
So what is the problem with sovereignty then? I have to admit to you, that was the hardest part of the book for me to grasp. Was I know I was completely taken in by the carrot of subsidiarity. I loved the way he wrote about it. I didn't fully understand the objection to sovereignty. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, sovereignty is in a lot of ways the central idea of modern political theory. It emerges in the early modern period. And what it amounts to, I'm just going to try to give my short sort of polemical answer, is it amounts to taking something that's rightfully attributed only to God and bringing it down into the world and assigning it to a human construction. And what that thing is a power or authority of which there's nothing higher, right? So that's answerable to nothing else, right? Yeah. And not only is there nothing higher, but in a sense, there's nothing lower. Okay, so meaning that anything that operates, any power that operates below the sovereign does so through the sovereign's permission or the sovereign's commissioning of them.
Yeah.
So they're sharing in the sovereign power, which means they have no authority intrinsic to themselves, no power that emerges out of what they are, right? So that the smaller groupings might be granted some kind of authority, but they're granted it by this hegemonic thing. So this is. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I can see that when I think of the evil communist dictators in China.
Yeah.
But, because that is, they'll tell you that's what they're doing. They're making everything the state. But how does that apply to a liberal democracy? Like, say, I don't know, the United States.
Sure. So the idea, think about it this way. So I'm glad you brought up liberalism. And by liberalism here, I'm going to try to discuss it, not meaning left liberalism, but liberalism as this is always confusing.
Right.
Liberalism as the tradition, one branch of the Enlightenment tradition on political thought. The assumption there, let's say, is that society is made up of a vast sea of individuals who are entering into contracts with each other for mutual gain, or for everyone's seeking their own advantage, and they are interacting with each other therefore through agreements. And the first agreement they'll make is a social contract, right? Some sort of an agreement to establish a power that's in play. But that power then think about it this way, if every human interaction, if we conceive of every human interaction as contractual, then we're necessarily assuming or imagining that there's three parties to every human interaction. There's the two people entering into the contract, and there's the third thing, which is the state, which enforces the contract.
Okay.
Right? So if to the extent that you imagine all human interaction is contractual, to that very extent, you're imagining some political centralized power penetrating into every aspect of human interpersonal relationships. Right? And okay, so why does that matter? Well, because what ends up happening in, say, a liberal society is that there's a tendency towards starting out with that intellectual presupposition and then over the course of time attempting to render it true. All right, so what I mean is you're looking at a liberal society is evaluating the society, the condition of the people, seeing places where they have interpersonal relations that don't seem to be contractual. All right, so say interpersonal relationships that are based on loyalty, on extended families, on guild structures, I don't know, whatever, something other that's not contractual, it's on exchange. Faith, there you go, the church. And then attempting to transform it or transfer it from something like that into relationships that are based on contract. So another way of saying that would be, say, commercializing the relationship, or describing it in through the means of negotiating rights, rather than talking about the fulfillment of human persons in their loving obligations to each other, but talking about mutual rights and negotiation of rights. These sorts of things allow us, or the strategy there is to redescribe human interactions that are not contractual as if they are contractual, right? All right, then you set about actually rendering that so as much as you can, right? So the trajectory of the liberal societies then is towards the commercialization of ever more realms of life, the contractualization of ever more realms of life, right? Ever more contracts, which means ever more lawsuits, which means ever more, but all of that is an ever greater expansion of the central authority, the central power.
Who has to settle any dispute of a contract.
Right.
So always is involved.
Always is involved. So the more you can expand competition, the more you expand the state. You see, so what that means is that as people, and this is what we were talking about earlier, as people conform to that mode of being, so to the extent that we in fact come to resemble the liberal theory of man, which is a self-interested actor, to the extent that we come to actually be that way, to that extent, the power that structures those competitive relationships is sovereign, right? It is in fact the universal power. And so there's, that means it theoretically has no limit. It theoretically structures everything. Historically speaking, it's in the process of making that as true as it can.
So, for example, it could just begin to redefine reality if it wanted to. It could say,
well, yeah,
marriage has always meant this, but now it means this. Or
absolutely,
gender has always meant this, but now it means this.
No, that's right.
Am I getting it right? I'm getting the idea.
Yeah. So once you go that far, you start getting into the final stages of this sort of a thing, right? Or the final pushes. Yeah. Where the final pieces of the social reality that are not created by the state are now under review.
Yeah, yeah. Which is terrifying.
Components.
Which is terrifying.
Yes.
Right. We're choosing for ourselves whether we want to follow reality or be subject to reality, or to have reality be subject to us. We're the arbiters of what's real.
I mean, the thing that's important to realize is that had you gone to a, say, medieval village and told them that their activities, their farming, their artisan activities, their creation, that had you told them that was all economically motivated by supply and demand and price mechanisms and competitive, they would have looked at you like you were crazy and like, no, it's not. We're friends. We live here together. We are that this is the same sort of way that when someone comes to me and tells me that my family is nothing but a social construction and that my wife and I are engaged in these mutual exchanges, blah, 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 blah. And I say, well, that's nuts. That's not what's happening. That's what people who are engaged in thick communities at other levels of scale also thought when someone came and told them this.
Dr. Andrew Willard Jones is our guest. The Church Against the State is the book. But I want to take a call because I haven't taken any yet. Do you mind if we go to the phones?
No,
all right.
do it.
Let's go to Al in Cleveland, Ohio, listening on AM 1260, The Rock in Cleveland. Al, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Willard Jones.
Hello.
Hello, Al. Go ahead.
Okay. So I've just hopped onto the show real quick here. I'm on my way home from work. It was kind of interesting, and I'm a mailman. There's a guy I talked to my mail route. He's a Jewish fellow. He's real nice, and he talks to me a lot about topics related to sort of subsidiarity. And one of the things he always brings up is the Declaration of Independence and how unique it is in that it brings in a relationship with the Creator, and it creates an actual covenant with the Creator. And his argument is always, I'm going to try and sum it up, is that like when you bring in the Creator through a covenant, you bring in everything connected to him. So when the Declaration of Independence declared this republic to be like a sovereign state under the Creator, like it brings the Creator, and they clearly use biblical language, so they're clearly referencing biblical Creator of Genesis. And like that, it creates a very unique situation for our country, and I really like hearing him talk about stuff like that. I just find it really interesting. But then he goes on about stuff like how the United States right now, there's been like Supreme Court cases or something like that have declared it like a corporate entity. So that kind of like takes away from the Declaration of Independence. And he can go on and on about all this stuff. And what do you think of that?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I will try to give a thought, maybe. Anytime, so the invoking of a Creator, of God as the source, can be a crucial component perhaps a necessary component in undoing theories of sovereignty. Because the idea has to be something like this, like there is a created order, and that order has truth content and has ethical content kind of baked into it. Right now, so there's a way that things are created to be. Now, that way they're created to be can be incredibly variable, right? Like the way in which, say, the way the example Thomas Aquinas gives is the 10 Commandments say, honor your mother and father. Okay, that becomes a law. But the manner in which you do that is incredibly variable, right? Like one culture can honor their mother and father very differently than another culture can. But what has to happen if they're going to be under the Creator is that they honor their mother and father, even though the place for human creativity and human legislation is practically infinitely variable under that umbrella, right? But what's happening there is that you're saying that the human construction of the human political construction is always a participation, a mediating into the world of the divine authority, of the divine power, the divine order, and it does not find its source in the human construction. You see, so what that means is that the human power is always capable of being judged, right? Because it means that that same creating divine power that institutes the top of the subsidiarity hierarchy, say the state, what we think of as a state, it's also constituting the bottom, right? So the family itself is a product of the creation, the Creator's act, as is the larger levels of community. You see what I mean? They're not receiving a kind of charter of existence from some man-made power, but are rather participating in a divine order that no man-made power creates or holds into being. And that means then that once you have that kind of a conception, then you can have both levels of hierarchy, right? You can have higher levels of authority, but at no point do those higher levels of authority escape the ability to be judged, because they themselves have a certain role to play or a certain hierarchical position where they are themselves mediating the divine law, the moral law, into the social whole. Well, that's also happening at the lower levels. You see, so the lower levels can then have a position to judge them. So an example might be, I know this may be very complicated, but an example might be, let's say we have a mayor of our city and he has a certain amount of authority, and that authority is real and I need to obey him within the realms of that authority. But if he comes into my living room and starts disciplining my children, then I, as a father, in my own power, right? Like not because I've been granted it by someone else, but in my own authority as my office in society, can say, hey man, get out of my living room, right? Stop disciplining my children. That's my job. So even though he's a higher power, he doesn't have sovereignty. You see, because we're participating in some order that is greater than all of us, right? And that is somehow present in all the different places. See what I'm saying?
Al, do you see? Did that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, I really like that last part. That was really interesting.
About
us fulfilling our office, our individual offices in the world. I think that's really interesting concept.
I think we're losing you just a little bit, Al, but I'm very glad you caught us on the way home. Thank you. Did you want to say something, Andrew? You look like you were about to say something. All right, I'm going to take a quick break then. We'll be right back. We'll continue with our conversation about the church against the state on subsidiarity and sovereignty, the new book from Dr. Andrew Willard Jones. And don't let me let you go without asking you about St. Joseph the Worker. I would like to know about the College of St. Joseph the Worker. All
right.
We'll do that when we come back on Catholic Answers Live.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Father Ken Briganti. Catholic radio reaches a vast audience of people. It's an excellent tool of evangelization in the 21st century. So radio is the best way for us to get to know the Lord, and then we can love Him and serve Him and prepare ourselves in this life to be with Him for all eternity.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am just having a great time talking about this book. I had a great time reading this book. It's really something, The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty. I'll tell you what, if you've ever been like, I'm not exactly sure what we mean by subsidiarity, and you kind of have a general view that it means that the state can't, parent your children. That's true, but there is a more expansive way of thinking about subsidiarity, and you can find it in this book, The Church Against the State, the new book by our guest, Dr. Andrew Willard Jones. So we talked a little about subsidiarity, a little bit about sovereignty. Is subsidiarity an entirely Catholic idea? Do you draw this from the Catholic Church, or does it have a wider provenance?
Yeah, the term itself, in the way we use it, is largely of Catholic social doctrine. Pius XI in the 1930s, I think, coined it. Well, it was. I mean, for public consumption, he coined it. It was
Right.
used in academic circles before that. But it's really it takes a lot of input from the tradition, deep tradition. I mean, from the Platonic and Aristotelian, Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, of an understanding of a thick hierarchical social structure, which is really an analog to the thick hierarchical cosmic structure, right? And so human beings are a microcosm and are therefore ordered. When we are ordered in justice, that common good, that the form that order takes towards the common good is a form that looks sort of like the cosmic hierarchical order. And that's really the idea, I think, of subsidiarity at the deepest levels. It's really a anthropology and a metaphysics, rather than it is an argument over policy. It's not really a policy argument.
Would you say it doesn't seem to me that I'll put it this way. It didn't seem to me in the reading of the book that you could say, well, this clearly aligns with one of the two main political positions that the world has. I mean, actually, there's three, maybe even four big positions globally. But you have generally left against right, liberalism, conservatism. These are the general expressions. I think maybe this populism is a new thing. I'm not exactly sure, but it seems to be different from, and for that reason, kind of exciting and terrifying. And then there's just a naked statism, like in Nicaragua or China or North Korea. But it doesn't seem to me that you're saying, this subsidiarity thing, if you really followed it, you'd be a conservative. Or if you really followed it, you'd be a liberal. That doesn't seem to me that you're finding that kind of a fit anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the big problem is, and like you brought up populism, so things are changing, right? So things are shifting and moving. So, but generally speaking, in the last 100 years or so, definitely through the 20th century, the two big political options in the United States anyway, the right and the left in the United States, were really, for the most part, and this is a generalization, but for the most part, were different flavors of liberalism, right? So you had kind of a right-wing liberalism, a kind of left-wing liberalism, but different flavors of that basic ideology. And then you have in Europe and other places different flavors of socialism, right? So like communism, social democracy, different flavors of socialism, which are somewhat analogous to the way we had different flavors of liberalism. But all of those, both those options, the kind of left or the liberal option or the quasi-socialist option, are really versions of Enlightenment political theory, and versions of universal sort of rationalist political theories that deny the significance of subsidiarity or even acknowledge it as existing. Both sides, both of those things do.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so when you see subsidiarity, you see that the way in which human flourishing is embedded in these real communities, then where you find maybe in the modern world some affinity is in some of the populist stuff. Maybe you get hints of it in some of the nationalist writings that have been written. But most of the time, those things, because they're not Christian, take that idea of some sort of solidarity or fraternity between men, and then ideologize it, and you end up with, right-wing totalitarianism or whatever, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and so,
you do.
And that's just a different sort of error, right? So if one way of thinking about it might be that, you think about the French Revolution and the slogan of the French Revolution, the liberty, fraternity, or liberty, equality, fraternity. And if you think, liberty is sort of that liberalism move, and equality, that kind of socialist move, and then fraternity turns into the nationalist and in its most extreme form, fascist move. And what is missing, this is typical of all heresy, right, is that you take one component of the truth or one piece and absolutize it at the expense of the others.
Yep.
And so most of the modern ideologies, really those three big ones, are examples of that. And that's one of the reasons why Catholic social teaching seems confusing to people, is because they're raised up in those ideological systems, and then they see Catholic social teaching and it feels like a strange hodgepodge.
It does,
we took a little bit of this, and we took a little bit of that, and we took a little bit of this. But that's actually the total opposite of what's going on. What's actually going on is that the ideologies have ripped apart Christian teaching.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So they've taken individual liberty at the expense of equality and fraternity. They've taken equality at the expense of liberty and fraternity,
Right.
and they've maximized those and created the ideologies.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who are derivative from us, not the other way around.
I love it. I love that analysis. It's brilliant and fantastic, and thank you for it. Again, The Church Against the State is the name of the book. But okay, so that is description. What is the prescription?
Yeah, that is always the hardest questions, especially for a historian. And normally historians try to dodge it by saying that, but I'm going to try to give it an answer. The beauty of subsidiarity, when you come to understand it, is that you come to understand that human happiness, which is the objective here, human happiness does not depend on the proper order of the biggest and strongest things, right? The biggest and strongest things can aid human happiness, and they ought to contribute to it. But where we find it most immediately is in our families and in our friendships, right? So we build structures of peace, communities of peace, communities of virtue, communities of helping each other, of self-government. And that's where human flourishing is the most intense. And larger things, and not only is that where it's most intense, but as we build those things, we become powerful and not easy to boss around and not susceptible to threats.
We're protected, in other words, by those. Yeah.
So the beauty of it is that you don't have to win the biggest fight to win the small fights, right? The small fights are within your power, like the power we have. I have, you have, we all have. We have power. We're not helpless. And if we order those places that we control towards justice, that is the means by which the whole thing becomes available to be ordered to justice. Right? That's the only way it'll happen.
Yeah.
So that's not just not hopeless. It's we have work to do. We can do it.
Yeah. It's a mission. It's not just hopeless. It's do this. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm so glad we got to talk about The Church Against the State on Subsidiarity and Sovereignty, the new book from Andrew Willard Jones. It really is an important book, and I hope many, many people will read it. I've only left you about 30 seconds to tell me about St. Joseph the Worker College.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So it's a new college in Steubenville. It's different because what it is a liberal arts college where we learn about politics, economics, theology, philosophy, and then at the same time, the students learn a trade. So they become carpenters or electricians or plumbers. And so we combine both those things, head and hands, trying to cultivate a fruitful, flourishing laity, the vocation of the laity.
Praise
That's the mission.
God. It's what we need. Check it out, the College of St. Joseph the Worker. Dr. Andrew Willard Jones, I'm extremely grateful that you took the hour. I feel like I could do another hour with you just on friendship. I think your writing about friendship is fantastic. And I do think that Christ having called all of us his friends is relevant to our political theory, that
Absolutely.
we involve God, or God involves himself in friendship with us. And when we forget that, we get completely off track. But in any case, I thank you so much. I hope people will get The Church Against the State, the new book from Andrew Willard Jones. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.